Hello and welcome back to the Life Fit podcast. I'm your host, Jack O'Halloran, and today I chat with the founder of Aclai and host of the Rebel Matters podcast, Ainle of Cairealláin. Aclai provide an alternative take on health and fitness, integrating quality movement training, professional coaching and social get-togethers to promote physical and mental health and community spirit. In February 2020, and after 2 years of planning and fundraising, Ainle and his team travelled to Bethlehem to set up the ACLAÍ Palestine community gym in the Aida Refugee Camp in the West Bank. The Aida Refugee Camp is home to over 5,500 Palestinian refugees who live under very difficult circumstances, and ACLAÍ Palestine provides a space for the residents of the camp to work on their health and fitness in an environment where such resources are very limited. In this beautiful conversation, we cover a variety of topics such as the importance of community, the health industry, the ACLAÍ Palestine community gym, creativity, being a podcaster, and much, much more. We also share many tips, tricks, and hacks that you can start implementing and practicing today to help you in your journey through life. You can find out more about Ainle and his work at aclai.ie. That's ACLAI.ie. And if you enjoy what we do here, we'd be very grateful if you could share and support our work. We are on Instagram and Facebook at LifeFit Studios, or you can hook me up on my personal account at jackohalloran_ie. We are also on Patreon, where every donation you make goes a long way to keeping the lights here at the show. We are the LifeFit podcast there. So, without further ado, I invite you now to open up that heart of yours, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the show, Ainle. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Jack.
How about that? Are you enjoying the sunshine out there? I think we've had 2 days of drowning in the rain and the sun is finally back out.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Like, I'm living right beside the river, so I've always got a kind of a fairly nice view.
Nice. You weren't dipping in for a swim anytime soon, were you?
No. I'd be a brave person that would go for a dip in the Lee at the section that I'm looking at anyway.
Yeah, you can't get that many tetanus injections. So, Ainle, I suppose just to introduce you to our audience, a lot of them may know you already, but maybe if you want to give a bit of background about yourself, where it all started off for you and how you got to where you are today, and then we'll get cracking on where exactly you are today. How does that sound?
Yeah, well, I suppose that what most would know me from would be, well, most recently would be through the podcast, the Rebel Matters podcast, which I've been focusing on more so than usual over the last month or two because of the lockdown and just having more time to put into it and stuff like that. And the other main project that I would be involved in would be Aclai, the personal training facility in Cork, and then the third project that I've been most recently involved in has been opening a kind of a community-based training facility in the Aida Refugee Camp in Palestine. We actually just came back from Palestine just before this all kicked off, so we were over there just on time and managed to get the facility opened for the people of the camp over there. That was kind of on the back of two years of solid fundraising and kind of teamwork to make that project happen. So we were actually very fortunate to get it done. If we had been there 5 or 6 days later on, there would have been real doubts whether or not we would have been able to get the job done, and we would have been in quite a bit of difficulty trying to get back as well. Probably still be out there. So they're the main things, really.
Awesome. I suppose just because definitely two of those seem to bridge in nicely, is that your own gym in Cork, Aclai, which is very community orientated, and you say you're trying to get that same kind of buzz going on in Palestine. What kind of inspired you to go down the route of a community-based gym? Because you do things like a book club, and I know there's the Lone Moor where you get a big table out and invite everyone and anyone to bring what they want and share in food and conversation, and many other things as well, like the gym jam you had last year for the fundraiser. What kind of, I suppose, push you in the direction of deciding to run a community-style gym as opposed to, the many other style of gyms that are out there that are like just purely membership-based and, around weight loss or around strength or around whatever, that you seem to have a different angle from it that incorporates, that psychosocial element to health. more so than a lot of other places?
It's actually a pretty interesting question. It's one that I've been asked quite a number of times over the last few years, especially because really, what it kind of is, the real question is like, at what point do you pick to sort of highlight the direction that sent us in, if you know what I mean? Like, for me personally, the way that when I start thinking about answering that question, I go a couple of years back, and then I go a couple of years back, and then I go a couple more years back, and I'm like, it just keeps going all the way back to the minute really that I was born. I think that like growing up in West Belfast has definitely had a big impact on the direction that I've gone with my career. Like, as you say, kind of like building Aclai as a very, I suppose, community focused is a decent enough way to say it. But you see, like, to be honest, I think that our approach comes from the fact that I have a very strong belief that we're kind of like we're a community oriented species. Like, we need that connection with each other for many reasons. And I think that one of the biggest things that I think one of the biggest dangers of how we're living today is that we're constantly being pushed towards more and more individualism. And I think that that's a very dangerous direction to be going in from an individual health point of view, but also from the point of view of kind of like community health and the wider sort of not so much. And I say health, I don't particularly mean like that our bodily functions are working well, but it's just in terms of how society operates. I think that it's very important that we have a sense of community, and that's something that it's something that I grew up with very, very strongly in West Belfast. We have a very strong community, and I think that the importance of the community that I come from was highlighted by the fact that in essence, I would kind of see that I was born into a community that was under siege from the very minute that I came on into the life, along with my brothers and along with the other people that I grew up with, the generations ahead of me and the generations behind me as well. And like, it just leaves it really like that the modern sort of concept of individualism, in a way you can kind of trace it back to the policies of Margaret Thatcher in England in the 70s, where she made a concerted effort to break down unions and break down communities that were able to stand together to make collectively a better living conditions for themselves, and made a concerted effort to break all that down in favor of this more individualistic lifestyle. And if you look at the sort of capitalist system of economy, that's when that started going like on a very steep incline in terms of how much wealth was being hoarded by a very small number of people. And that whole concept is based on just looking after yourself and your own front garden and not worrying about the greater good. And then what that leaves you open to really is that, well, first of all, you become more socially isolated, and second of all, you've that sense of being a part of something greater, of a community, or of something that's bigger than yourself. Like, when you think, really, like, even the term community is kind of like a tricky term to use these days because of the fact that it's used so much. It's used so much, but not in the way that it's meant. It's used in a way that, like, we all need to be a part of something. It's just, I think it's just part of our inbuilt kind of like psychology, that to feel safe, that we need to be a part, we need to feel valued. And nowadays, like, people are saying community, and then but it's contingent on whether you can pay for to be a part of that community or not. You know what I mean? Like businesses use the term community. Like if you look at a lot of the big American companies that the multinational companies and the tech companies, the kind of culture that they're after building within their businesses is that it's just a big family. But that's not true. It's not a family. It's only a family for as long as you're doing your work and you're there. And if you feel like a part of the family in quotation marks or the community in quotation marks, then you're going to do more work. And the only thing that really the company cares about is you do your work and that you make profit for them, and that's it. So for me, like really, the term community means that people are looking out for each other, and that if you get sick, then someone else can come and help you. Do the stuff that you need to do, bring your kids to school, or help you with making your food, or whatever the case may be. So, that's the kind of community that I came from. I seen the value of it from a very young age, and I also seen the negative side of that kind of individualism. And like that's where our approach comes from. Really, it's if you like the primary thing that we do is we do personal training with people. We bring 4 people into the gym for 1 hour, and each has their own program, and we bring them through their programs, then they leave and the next 4 comes in, and that's the kind of personal training side of things. But as you mentioned, we have got the book club once a month. We've got the Lone Moor, which is maybe every 2 or 3 months, and we do storytelling nights, and sometimes we do movie nights as well, and all the other things that we do outside of the personal training they're always free events. So it's just about kind of breaking down the barrier to entry and just like getting people in. And when I think about that side of things, that kind of coming together stuff that we do, I think that's largely influenced by the fact that in the last decade especially, that we've gone through a very serious mental health crisis in Ireland, and that I think that is partly because of the fact that we're being pushed more into our kind of like individual bubbles, and also we're also pushed into a more competitive kind of society. And I think those are 2 things that I had in mind whenever we started doing these social events where we're bringing people together, where there's no cost and there's no competition, and it's just getting to know people. I think that has very positive benefits from a mental health point of view as well.
Absolutely. And I suppose to pick up on a few points there is that I remember when I was young, I used to do a lot of kind of either gardening or stonework or manual labour work. And say, for example, if you had one task to do that took an hour to do by yourself, somebody might assume or think that if you had 2 people, it might take you half an hour. Whereas in fact, when you double work, you exponentiate your growth forward, and you could do an hour work in 15 minutes with 2 people. And I think that's a huge benefit of having people involved. And if you take, for example, your 40-year-old couch potato who's connected to Netflix, connected to baked potatoes, connected to pizza, connected to sitting in their office all day, and they're not currently connected to their physical health in a way that maybe might manifest in 10 to 20 hours of physical activity a week. If there's gyms or if there's places of movement, places of health available that can also bridge other connections, that can get them involved in social aspects, get them involved in other parts, it will be certainly harder for them to give that up once they start. And I think that's a huge benefit to a community-orientated health movement, is that it's nearly harder to leave. And we all know just how easy it is to leave a health fad. Many people in January or whatever, they might start a health fad, and 3 weeks later, the connection hasn't quite myelinated in their brain yet, and they're back into their old habits. But as a way to ingrain a habit more, if you can set up more patterns around that are recognizable, I would assume then you'd have a higher retention rate. And I'd assume that you'd probably see that in your own kind of retention data, that people who do join would have a higher likelihood to stay compared to maybe a gym that just offers like open gym or maybe the odd class or whatever. I think there is a huge benefit to that added connection. And it's probably not something that's understood by most people. As you say, people are being trained now to be so individualistic. And that's all well and good because, I don't know, we're nodes within a network, and we're being trained to just be nodes instead of forgetting our network. And it's really the network that kind of binds us in our power, because say, for example, if you know 1,000 people and I know 1,000 people, then you're only ever one person away from a million people. And that's what really, for me anyway, what adds the value in community. To go on a little bit from that, I mean, there's probably loads of sayings going way back, but we're certainly safer when we're surrounded by more things. Now, because that's a double-edged sword. If we can be surrounded by negative things, so we can surround ourselves with bad people, bad habits, eating habits, smoking habits, different things like that, and we can get connected and stick to them just as easily. And that's maybe easier to do in today's world. And you mentioned the modern kind of pandemic of mental health, is that there's a lot of negative stuff out there that we can connect to. There's a lot of people cutting each other down, a lot of people fighting each other, a lot of people competing with each other. And there's not as much open source community things. To bring a bit of my own background, where I came from, I come from, a country village in County Cork. And I remember my grandmother told me a story before of the 1950s, and she ran a pub. And right next door to the pub was the farrier's forge. And every morning at about 8 o'clock, the farrier's forge would be full of people. So all the local young fellas would come down there and they'd hang out there kind of next to the pub. And there could be 100 people in the pub at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and not necessarily drinking. And any local farmer then who had a bit of work to do would come to that community place, get whatever workers he needed, and they'd go about their day. And within 10 years of the first tractor arriving, that forge had closed down. And even, that's going back to the 50s. You want to go back 80s and 90s. Again, I've been told stories of how the pub could have been full at 8, 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning if it was a rainy day. Whereas now we've lost a lot of those things in our society. So there's certainly a need to be fulfilled there. And the likes of yourself with Aclai seem to be trying to achieve that, because it's not just, we don't want people to just be physical machines. We want people to be emotional machines, and we want people to be resilient in, spiritually, emotionally, psychosocially, physically, and so on. One facet of that isn't enough. So I think it's a really fascinating angle. And even in the studio, in my own studio, in the Life Fit studio, we've kind of incorporated the same thing. Just as Corona was starting, we'd maybe 3 weeks before the lockdown, we'd started doing a monthly movie club, monthly book club, and a monthly games night. And it's just, again, totally free. And it's just a way to allow people to connect to something. Because what we're connecting to nowadays, it's often on a screen. It doesn't give us much kind of authentic dopamine feedback. It's, the likes of Facebook or Instagram. They're designed in the same way slot machines are designed. They're designed to give you a very shallow instant gratification kind of reward setup. Whereas when you are face to face with somebody or a group, I mean, let's say if you're behaving badly, they'll let you know about it. And if you're behaving well, they'll let you know about it. But either way, there's always that reality to it. There's that, you can't get away with hiding. You can't get away with anything. And it's a far more real thing that is built into our biology for millions of years. And it seems like the last few years, we've kind of lost our way a bit with it. I don't know how you'd feel on that now in terms of, local small villages or in cities. You still have the likes of the GA in Ireland, which would have a community effect. But other than sports, there's not a whole pile else that binds people to something greater than themselves. And when we don't have something greater than ourselves, it takes a very kind of small wind to blow us over, and then we're locked into narcissism or locked into nihilism, or we're at the bottom of the ocean. Whereas when we have somebody there or a group of people around us, and they might be connected to us for many reasons, a friend of a sister, a friend of a brother, a friend of a mother, a parent, whatever it is, colleagues, so on and so forth. The more of those we have around us, and the stronger they are that are around us, then if something negative were to happen to us, they'd pick us up again. And it kind of incorporates into that idea of, I think everyone is seeking happiness today, but we all know that happiness is just comes upon us every now and then. Like in the grand scheme of things, life is probably a lot worse than it is good. Like people die, and there is that inevitability of negative things happening. Whereas negativity doesn't have to be hell. So you take, for example, a situation where, say, your parent dies. And it's all very sad, but there's a big difference between your parent dying and between your parent dying and all of your siblings arguing over the dead body. One is reality, the other is kind of learned hell. And the less we're kind of coming together in communities, the less we're seeing that, and we're creating more hell for ourselves, which then manifests out in, as you say, the mental health numbers, suicide rates, and so on. even the way we're using social media and things like that, it's all very keeping up appearances, And I think for the likes of your gym to clearly be succeeding, because it is, it's there's always a good vibe in there. There's always plenty of people around. Anytime you ask your community for help, be it the gym jam or be it other fundraisers you've done, it's been reciprocated. And there's a huge power in that. And I think the people who reciprocate that also know that they're going to get that in return. So when they want, they're bored on a Thursday night or whatever it is, and they see, geez, you know what, there's an open arms book club here. Doesn't matter who I am, doesn't matter where I'm from, I'm welcome here and I can chat about my ideas and so on. And that kind of relationship then, once it gets going, it can really build into something special. Probably something we had a lot more of, again, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that we're at risk of losing. But I think the more we do know about it, the less we'll lose it. And it's a very, very important thing to not to lose. So I don't know what you'd think on that, but I suppose to bring it to slightly more on beyond Aclai Cork and bring it to Aclai Palestine. How do you find the attempt to set up a community in a community that you're not living in as such? Has that been a kind of an unusual challenge? Because it's very hard to set a community up when you're not in it yourself, even though I suppose you're in it from a more distant point of view, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I suppose to go back on just a couple of things that you were saying there, I think that like in simple terms, what we're doing with ACLAÍ in Cork and what we did with ACLAÍ in Palestine is just an extension of what we did in Cork. I think that it's very important to consider what the function of a business is in the first place. Like, we live in a capitalist society, and if you take that to sort of its logical conclusion, the main function of a business in a capitalist society is to make money. And that then leads to the commodification of people, whether that's the customers or whether it's the staff, and the commodification of them as labourers to create more capital. And it's a more important time now than ever to reconsider our relationship with business and our relationship with capitalism, because from the very outset, ACLAÍ has to make a profit because that's just the society that we live in. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the profit has to be the priority of the business. For me, like, the function of a business within a community is to give real value back to that community in a complete cycle. So that's from the people that are working there to the people who are coming to use the service as customers. It's to the people who live in the immediate vicinity of the business. And then to expand that out, it's also the real test for us as a business, and our philosophy and our approach was whether we could apply what we've built in Cork to another community in Palestine who could really benefit from the type of system that we're after building over the last 7 years or so. And I think that that's a philosophy that I think, it's a philosophy that we should look at, because if you look at now, like most businesses are closed down and stuff like that, we've really seen this as the biggest challenge to the capitalist system that we've ever seen, and as you were saying earlier, like in terms of what we might come out of the other side of the lockdown with, I think that that's one potential thing that would be good to look at, is that kind of relationship that businesses have with their community. So the project in Palestine really started about 2.5 years ago, and it just started from a conversation I had. I suppose the gym jam was the first thing. That the first gym jam was in 2018. We raised $4,500 or something like that there for the Irish wheelchair rugby team who qualified for the World Championships, and that came from just a conversation that I had with someone during a training session. We were just sitting there stretching and thought, that the space we have in Cork would be a great place to have a party in. And then we said, well, we could use it for a fundraiser. And then one of our coaches, Alan, was playing wheelchair rugby for Ireland, and they had qualified for the World Championships and had very little or no funding for the trip. So we decided to run kind of like it was kind of like a rave, I guess, kind of an underground rave for a night. And people all around Cork chipped in to help, or to give us a lend of equipment, or to give us stuff for the raffle, or to come and work at the gym. And then they came to the event. And then I had been in Palestine, then that was in July 2018, and in August I went out to Palestine and was volunteering at the Aida Refugee Camp, which is a refugee camp in the West Bank. It's kind of it's known as the most tear gas place in the world because of the volume of tear gas the Israeli army use on the residents there. There's 5,500 people living there, and they've got very limited access to clean water, health services, and really a lot of the amenities and facilities that we would take for granted, they haven't got access to at all because of the fact that they're living under an illegal military occupation. And I was out there volunteering and just got chatting to one of the founders of a community centre there called the Laji Centre that was providing cultural opportunities and for kids in the camp. And they established an environmental unit to test the water quality in the camp and campaign for better conditions. They started roof gardens. They have a media unit that was recording bits and pieces of. They was recording the incursions that the army and stuff were making into the camp and recording what life was like there. And really, it was the strength of the connection that I felt with the people in that centre, and the similarities between the Laji Centre and some of the work that people of, say, our parents' generation had done to provide us with opportunities in Belfast in the face of a similar kind of oppression. When I started to build that connection with them, I just kind of started thinking about how we could work together. And the thing about the gym in Palestine is if I was a carpenter, I would have been out there doing some carpentry. It just so happens that this is what I was doing in Ireland, and therefore we started exploring the idea of doing something out there. And then the Laji Centre don't have any source of funding like from the government or anything out there, and to do a project like this was going to have to be self-funded. So we started after that then looking at the possibility of how we were going to raise the money and how much it was going to cost, and that kind of kicked off the process. But the question that you asked about setting up a gym in a community out there, like the thing is that like, and like the thing is not to view people who live in Palestine as separate. We're one and the same. And when you have something so acute that kind of helps to form a bond, like the fact that there are so many similarities between the situation in Palestine and the situation that we experienced here in Ireland, then that bond becomes stronger and stronger. There's a lot of differences between the two situations as well, of course, but there are a lot of similarities. And having grown up with an understanding of what was happening in Palestine and an understanding that we're all connected in the world anyway, I think that maybe kind of got that project off to a bit of a head start. And certainly the people who we were working with in Palestine felt the same, sort of reciprocated the same kind of bond with people from Ireland, and especially people who had suffered under British rule in the six counties as well. So that's kind of where that project came from. And to be honest, there's no insurmountable difficulty that we've had so far, and we've faced a lot of challenges to get that place open. And the challenge of opening it in a community in Palestine is by far not the most difficult one. Some of the most difficult challenges that we faced were that getting the equipment out there
Hmm.
and getting it landed safely to where we wanted it to be. And that has nothing to do with really the Palestinian community that the gym is going into, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. And what way did you kind of have to go to get there? I assume you didn't go through Israel, did you? Or did you have to?
You have to go through Israel.
Huh.
The thing with Palestine is they're not in control of their own borders. They haven't really got a border of their own anymore. As such, I think that they're most of the information that we're given about the conflict in Palestine comes through the British and the American media outlets for the vast majority, and a lot of the time it's biased towards the Israeli side. And the other thing is that a lot of the news that we do hear that's happening in Palestine, it's often the big headline pieces of news, like when the Great March for Freedom was on and the Israeli snipers were killing people from very far away who posed no threat to them. We heard that on the news, but there are a lot of aspects of life out there that you don't hear. For example, the complete lack of access to clean water, especially in refugee camps. The like that thing you said about like I can't even post a letter to my friends in Palestine because they just won't get it, because the postal service is completely cat. And if we try to send that gym equipment straight into the camp, it would just get confiscated. The same organization that we were working with to open the gym, they had a connection with this project to open playgrounds in refugee camps. And last year, the year before now, the authorities out there seized the playground equipment, which is just swings and stuff like that,
abysmal,
and put it into storage and started charging for the storage of the equipment still in storage. So for the effort that we had gone through to raise the money to make this project happen, the main concern really was to get the equipment through safely. And there was one of our team, Sally McMonigal, who is from Killarney. She did like an unbelievable like amount of technical acrobatics and building contacts and to get the equipment to get safe passage to the gym. And the night that the equipment rolled in was a very happy night for all of us, because we knew that we had succeeded. And really the success wasn't getting the gym equipment in there, but the greater success was that we had managed to get the equipment in. Number one, pretty much adhering to the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign, which is probably one of the most effective ways that international people can help the Palestinians, is to boycott goods that are coming from Israel, and especially goods that are coming from settlements. And the other thing was that we were able to get it in, like the camp that the gym equipment went to, it's surrounded on all sides by military watchtowers. And even in itself, just to get the gear all the way through all the hoops that we had to get it through to get it land in the gym was a great success in itself. So since then, we've been working quite closely. We established a coaching team out there, and since then, really, we've just been kind of working with them remotely to train them up on the programs and stuff, that eventually, whenever the lockdown has been lifted over there, that they'll be able to start working with members of the community out there and bringing them through the gym system. Like two of the biggest problems two of the biggest health problems out there in the camp are high blood pressure and diabetes, two conditions that are very much so exacerbated by the living conditions in the camp and the stress that people are under just because of the 24/7 occupation. So I suppose we're very fortunate to be able to do something that's kind of directly, hopefully, going to benefit people there as well,
I think it was a good point you made earlier on about, people hear some stuff in the news over here, and usually we hear probably something so terrible, but it's very easy to ignore something terrible because it's so scary, but we don't often hear about the little everyday things that are going on, the likes of the constant checkpoints, the likes of even trying to get a letter delivered. And people don't realize the weight of that situation. And, I think we're a lot closer to it ourselves than what we realize, not only from our history, but I mean, from our future too. What's to stop any government or any, world order or whatever doing the exact same thing to us, which there might be some hints at it already even happening. But there certainly is that common ground, definitely between the Irish and the Palestinians. But I think if pretty much anyone looks deep enough, they'll find a common ground. And I like the way you decided to go about that after seeing your common ground, was you said, well, instead of trying to, solve the whole world, it's just you do what you're good at. And what you do is gyms and health and things like that. So why would you go off trying to, I don't know, set up a political establishment out there when movement and health and things is your baby? And I think if more people, and this is worldwide, not just Palestine, but if more people can connect with each other's common ground and then share what they're good at, generally then that rising tide will lift all boats. Whether you're in Palestine, Nigeria, Timbuktu or Ireland or wherever. And people miss that. And to go back further along to kind of what we were saying earlier about business and capitalism and things like that, I think, again, coronavirus provides a great opportunity for people to see this, but I think we kind of we need to reevaluate our value system. We considered before that profit is financial profit, but I mean, we all know of somebody who probably earns 100,000 a year, has to buy the fancy Mercedes and 4 holidays just to keep up with the stress of it. Whereas somebody who's doing some simple work with less money can be a lot happier without spending half as much. And most people just have this kind of correlative thinking between money and value. Whereas, there's this idea of being beautifully tired after your day where you come home and you kicked some ass and you say, you feel wrecked in your body, but in a good sense. And I mean, what's more valuable than helping somebody out? I mean, can you put a price on that? Is it a tenner? Is it 100 quid? Whereas we're just so obsessed with the money side of it. There is so much other value. In fact, you'd often flog away money because right now everyone's been given 350 euros for, it's not a free lunch, but apparently free. When, like, this devil that we've been worshipping all along and that money, sure, it's worthless. They're able to just print it if they want. Whereas, things like a smile on a child's face who's had nothing but tear gas, or, a hug off a loved one, or whatever it is, that's where the real value is.
Yeah, actually, I'd just like to jump in there because, like, it's a very dangerous kind of like message to be treading there, because yes, that's true. Like, to a certain degree, like, money doesn't matter, but the most people who say that are the people who have enough money. If you're on the breadline, then money does matter in the society that we live in.
Yeah.
So I think like it's a very I think like that's kind of why whenever I'm kind of talking about Aclai and the stuff that we do in the gym in Cork, it's firstly very important to realize that everybody needs money in today's society because you still have to pay your rent.
Yeah.
Like, our rent is still being charged at full whack in the house that we're living in, even though we're all after losing our jobs, essentially, So I think that it's true, but personally, I think that like one of the biggest problems with the fitness industry worldwide, especially in the Western world, which is only the really one that I know, is that like it's too preachy. I think that like it's, again, I kind of think it's connected to this kind of like a form of neoliberalism where the individual is important, but then and everyone becomes who can be the most woke, which I think is a problem because everyone is different. In this situation that we find ourselves in now, I'm in a very fortunate situation to be living by myself and to be able to do things that I wasn't able to do before. And when I see online, it's like it's important not to romanticize the fact that everyone is in a different situation. There's people living by themselves who are going through mental torture, and there's people who are living with people who are abusers. And I think it's really important just not to apply kind of blanket sort of like statements to everyone, but like, oh, we should all be doing this or we should all be doing that, because it's different for everybody, you know what I mean? And like, if you have enough money to pay your rent and to get your groceries, then it's easier to say that money doesn't matter and we should all just be nice to each other and stuff. But like, I agree with it to a certain extent, but I just think it needs to be it needs to be put into context. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, like it's. I suppose it completely matters. You know, you need to put the bread on the table at the end of the day. But I suppose what I was trying to get at is that up until at least pre-corona, there's been an over worship of money as the value. When yes, it's valuable and it can provide all of these wonderful materialistic things and even needed things such as food and shelter and so on. But that only gets us so far, and I think we've kind of overly worshipped that and forgotten our perspective on other things like human bonding, human connection, things like nature, things like, I don't know, the stars, or things like wisdom, education, and so on. And what we've ended up with is a lot of people nowadays are probably working a job that they're sacrificing the money because they're getting in bulk. So, for example, I've often worked in pubs or, as I said, on labouring in different sites and so on. And at any given hour, if you ask yourself the question, would I do this particular job for 1 hour for the hourly rate? There's not an absolute hope you would. But we get so sucked into the need for this money that we have no problem sacrificing 40 hours of it, you know? And it's not that we should get rid of currency, so to speak, because we'll always need some way to bargain and some way to kind of give something so we can get it. But I think we do need that slight readjustment of it, or reharmonizing of it, to where people can see, you know, it's not just a factor on 100 grand, or it's not just a factor on 40 grand or 10 grand or whatever it is. It's what does that 40 grand, 100 grand, 10 grand, what meaning does it give you? You know, and I personally prefer to be, let's just say, relatively comfortable to where you have food and shelter at the basics, and be doing something that you love and you know is making a difference, rather than be making millions and, you know that you're probably operating within a corrupt system, or you're probably flying out somebody else, or you know, whereas, I don't know, there's just this whole world, whether you want to call it capitalism or whatever, but we've certainly overvalued money as a value, where there is many other as well, you know.
I think that, like, there's an important point in there with regards to the post-corona situation and like how we're going to evolve coming out of this. But I think a very important part of the narrative there is what needs to be included in that narrative is a systematic change at kind of like a policy level. And I think that we need to take it. It's funny because, you know, we're both working in the health industry as such, and people are coming in and we work with people on a one-to-one basis, or you're helping people with their individual health. That's one aspect of it, and that's something that needs to be a really core part of our kind of approach. I think is like that you look after your health as much as you can. But I think that a part of the narrative that's missing is it's not enough just to say we should all just like realize that money isn't that important and go and spend more time in nature. Yes, that can be a part of the narrative, but the other part is that, like, if you've got 3 kids, you would work the shittest job in the whole planet for 70 hours a week to pay for the stuff. Yeah. You can't just say that doesn't matter anymore, that 40 grand isn't worth like the time you're putting into it. From that point of view, there needs to be a look at how we can change how like society is structured, you know, and like that's probably a whole other podcast and a whole separate subject. But I think it's an important thing to add into it is that, yes, we've realized that the way that society has been up until now was wrong, and to say that we're going to go back to normal, I think, is like, look at some of the things that were included in our normality before Corona, which are still a part of it, were like underfunding of the health service, or like over commodification of people overworking, all that thing. So we don't want to go back to that kind of normal, but it's also important not to be like, okay, everybody spend more time in the woods. Even though I was a massive advocate of that we be healthy and that we do things for our mental health and our physical health, and that we spend time together as a community and our families and stuff like that there. But the part of the narrative that has been missing most is that the overworking and the overcommodification and the emphasis on earning money and spending money, it's partly got to do with our individual philosophy on our individual outlook on life, but it's also a massive amount of that responsibility lies with the fact that we're being advertised to all the time. It lies with the fact that rents are being inflated artificially, house prices are being inflated all the time, and all that stuff is to the benefit of very few people who are at the top of the pyramid, who are taking the vast majority of the wealth. And I say, like, it's probably another whole other podcast and a whole other topic, but like, I think it's an important part to put in there.
Oh, it is. And to be honest, I don't think we should always separate it. We're two guys that have health businesses, but we're also two guys that live in this world. And I think too many people are happy to segregate all of these things and then say, oh, sure, I'll just do this and I'll forget and ignore about that. And when we do that, sure, then it's just, it's easy to ignore the shit that's happening to the kids in Palestine, or it's easy to ignore something that's happening somewhere else because it's not happening to me, at least. Whereas, if we have more conscientious businesses that are also making a community effort, that are also, trying to connect with people and meanings beyond just the service they're offering, or beyond just the X's and the O's coming in during the day of the money in and the money out, that there's something more to it. And whereas, I don't know, I think not that we've totally lost track of it, but there has been a reduction in how much we've focused on that through the years. And with Corona now, it's not that everyone has to move into this idealistic utopian world, because God knows what that would even be. But it's that this at least provides an opportunity for a bit of retrospection, for a bit of evaluation. It's like the game of poker and everything else is still going on, but it's just we've been handed this opportunity with a deck reshuffle. And what do we do from that reshuffle is I suppose time will tell, but it'll be very, very interesting to see. The sad thing, just to stay on Corona, I wonder, will people's fear of each other and close distance and germs and cleanliness and all those things, will that have an impact on people that are trying to bring people close together in physical space? Let's say even in 8 or 12 months' time, when the restrictions are gone, I wonder, will people have still kind of learned that fear of each other? And that's something I'm kind of a little bit worried about. But again, time will tell.
See, to go back on the point that you were making there about having, say, like a business or a project that has a certain value to the community that it's based in, I think that, and it's only the way that I personally feel about it, and that for me, like, one of the most valuable things about life is to feel like that I am connected to sort of my inner creativity, and that I'm doing something that I feel represents my values and that I feel is beneficial, that I enjoy doing, is beneficial to the people who are getting that service and beneficial to the people who are surrounded by that, who are surrounding the kind of service that we provide as well. But a lot of people, like, there are varying degrees to which people are, like, there are varying degrees of, like, privilege that allow you to be connected to your creativity in that way. And I think that I think that anything can be creative. I do think that, like, any job that we're doing can be creative. I feel very fortunate the fact that I've, through the help of others and through hard work and the luck of the draw and all those things, have been able to get to a place where I feel like the business that we have is a fairly clear representation of the combined creative efforts of mine and of the rest of the team as well. And I think that just something that's kind of connected with one of the points that you were making there before about it being the kind of combination of individual health and being a part of the bigger picture as well. And again, this is just my personal opinion, or my personal kind of philosophy, is I think that, like, there's always a struggle out there. Like, we live in an unfair society in many ways. We live in a very beautiful world, like a majestically beautiful world. there's no two ways about that. And there are things in every country that are unjust, and like a lot of that can stem back to the fact that there's a very small percentage of the population who control the vast majority of the wealth, and people are born into situations of disadvantage. There's racism, there's all these things. Depends where you are, but there's always a struggle going on, and I think that's very important that we balance our personal health and our mental health and our creative outputs with the fact that there's a struggle there all the time. It's everyone can't always engage in a struggle, and nobody can engage in a struggle all the time. It's just you can't be struggling all the time, but there's a balance there, and I think it's personally, I think that if I woke up tomorrow and became completely of the mind that there was no struggle, that there was nothing to struggle for, or there was no better conditions to strive for, that I think that like
You'd be in La La Land.
Well, I think that it would be unrealistic, and that's only my personal opinion, and that is of course connected to the fact that I am in a privileged enough position to be able to spend time or effort or creativity towards a cause that I feel is worthy. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's a great point to make, because a large premise of me even doing the show in the first place was when I set up business first, I felt so, like you said, you had this inner artistic desire to be able to spread it out and be able to share that. Like when I first started business, I felt like, geez, I had all these things I wanted to teach people and help people with and so on. But a very hard thing to do was to feel the space from which I could do it, or find the space from which I could do it. And that was a large part of this podcast and even the studio as well, was to create a space for where people can be comfortable enough that they can share their vulnerable and creative side. And that's where, you know, like we've had a chance to be fit and healthy and to be well fed and so on, but other people haven't. And it takes people like yourself then to try and create that space for them. And I think that's what the gym in Palestine kind of represents. It's, you know, those people are no different to us in the sense that they still have a desire to be healthy, they still have a desire to be loved, they still have a desire to fulfill their dreams, aspirations, and so on. But as an overall brotherhood in man or whatever, as an overall society, we could always do more to help each other and to give each other a platform to be able to express all of those kind of, you know, inner desires, such as if a person's an artist, a musician, they want to be fit, whatever it is, you know.
I think sometimes I think that that's true, but I don't think that it's universally true, because it depends on your current situation. Sometimes you don't feel creative and you don't feel like you want to help other people because you just need to look after yourself. And I think that's okay as well. That's one thing that I think kind of is getting, like, with the whole world of the curated world of social media, you would have thought that everyone and their dog was at home picking up new hobbies and like doing all this creative stuff and stuff. I'm sure many people were, and which is great. But then it's also important to realize that, like, the very nature of us as humans, sometimes you feel like shit, and you know, sometimes you need to go inward and look after yourself and separate yourself away from those things. And so I think that there's a balance there, you know, and I think that that's another kind of symptom that I kind of felt personally of the sort of recent years of social media and stuff like that, is that, like, there's the pressure there to make it seem like you're being super creative and have a massive output and stuff all the time. And for sure, like, I love doing creative stuff, and I love the projects that I'm involved in. I love working with the people that I work with, and you know, I love starting a new week and trying to work out what we're going to do. But then sometimes you just feel like you want to just curl up into a ball and just do nothing.
That's the cave, isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of people have forgotten the importance of the cave. That whole idea of do the inner work. I think the world is full of people that are trying to solve all the world's problems, but won't tidy their own bedroom first. You know, and we can never forget either side of that coin. You know, whether you're going to live for 50 years or 100 years, there's going to be ups and downs. And a lot of people are kind of stuck in the utopian sense of, oh, it'll all be ups, all be ups, all be ups. And then when something bad happens, they're they're into despair and they can't do nothing and they're paralyzed from it. So I think what you're saying is, yeah, that the value in taking a few days of being balled up on the couch, a few days of being depressed, a few days of whatever it is, there's huge value to that, and then that once you go through that and you come out the other side, that's where you wrestle the dragon and you get the gold, and you come out then, and then you're creative again, and then you're ready to share, you're ready to spread the message, you're ready to get shit done.
Yeah, I think like whenever I think about those things, whenever I'm actually really cautious about talking about them, because really all I can talk about with any authority whatsoever whenever I'm talking about creativity or feeling like shit or being a part of something greater, I can only ever relate to it as far as my own personal experience goes.
Yeah.
And I know that at times I have felt like the pressure to kind of make it seem like I always have a constant creative output that's just a non-stop flow of good stuff coming out. And I've also felt that that's not the way it is all the time. And then I think it just comes back to, again, just to kind of reinforce the fact that I'm only talking about my own personal experience and thoughts about it, that when that does happen, I think for me, the important thing was to make a bit of an inward journey and ask myself, why was I feeling bad about not being as creative as I normally am, or not being as productive as I normally am? And once I kind of started that inward journey, then really the thing that comes out the other side is that for me, like, it's just an acceptance of the fact that, like, that's just the way life is. It's not a constant upward line. It's up and down. Like one of my favorite books of all time is one that's written by a man who lived in Donegal, in the late 1800s, called Mickey Moore McGowan. The book was written in Irish, but the name of it is Ruha Moore and Ainle, The Big Wheel of Life. And the sort of overall moral of the story is that the wheel of life just keeps going around. And sometimes you're on the top of the wheel, and sometimes you're on the bottom of the wheel. But the thing is that it rotates again, and you become on top again eventually, and then later on you'll be at the bottom. So that's kind of the way that I look at it. And I think that it's something that I've become more acutely aware of in this kind of lockdown situation, because there's been days where I'm banging out podcasts, I'm getting stuff done with the coaching team in Palestine and doing a bit of journaling and everything, and then the kind of downward period just comes in like a dark cloud all of a sudden. And the thing that I try and do with myself in those instances is just to accept it and to be easy on myself, to take a break and do something completely different or unrelated. And again, like, in terms of my own situation here, like I am in a very fortunate situation that I've got like a roof over my head and whatever, I can have more time to do things that I want to. But like, whenever that has happened a few times since the lockdown started, it's kind of like I've just got into the habit of making myself a meal as if I was making a meal for one of my best friends. Just go into the kitchen and just like do it really kind of carefully and consciously, and make a really nice meal and just kind of write it out. But that's kind of the way that I kind of personally kind of balance them.
It's a great approach, because it's, that cycle approach is the same as polarity. You've no inside without an outside, you've no up without a down, you've no north without a south. You always have both sides of that coin, and too many people go through their life ignoring that, or trying to ignore it, even though it will force its hand on you. That kind of creative buzz then into your lull and so on. But then it's to go beyond that. How do we deal with it when we are in the lull? And even when we're in the good times, I think the same approach would help. But I think that's where love comes in, and self-love and forgiveness and things like that, is that when you're having a down day, is to accept it, as you said, and find a way then to, because you're going to have to write it out anyway. There's no such thing as an instant fix. Like, realizing it in and of itself isn't enough to get out of it. You still have to go through it for the 24 or 48, 72 hours, whatever it is. And that's then, be forgiving. Watch one of your favorite movies, make one of your favorite meals, do these things. And I think that's a good way to kind of look at it. And again, coronavirus has forced that for many people, because for better or for worse, there was a lot of things we were doing before coronavirus that were forced to be stopped on us, whether that was our careers, some sporting hobbies, social events and so on that we were used to, that all of a sudden they're gone. And now it's like, what are we left with? So that kind of cycle seems to be happening quicker now. So we're like up quicker and we're down quicker and we're up quicker and we're down quicker. It's just if we remember to accept that that's all normal, it's all part of the process. But what processes do we rely on when we're going through those? And I think, forgiveness, love, all of those things are certainly a better place to start than probably where most of us go, which is, that inner dialect of, geez, you're an awful bollocks, and, you prick, what you do that for, what you do that for, what you do that for. We're all prone to that when, it's understanding that we make mistakes, I think, and it's accepting mistakes as part of who we are as well. And then we can come out the other side when we finally do, and we're even better again, and if we're better tomorrow than what we were yesterday, sure, isn't that enough, and we can never quantify exactly what that'll be, but one step at a time, day by day kind of a thing.
Yeah, like personally, like I find it much easier to make those kind of reflections when I'm feeling pretty good. So I think that one of the most valuable things that I've done personally just in this kind of period of lockdown has been to spend a bit of time aside, get a bit of time aside to just write down some thoughts about the next time that the cycle comes around, or the next time that like it gets like really lonely. Sometimes if you're isolating by yourself, or that like you feel like a bag of shit, like what you're going to do, because it's a hard time to figure out what to do at the time when you're feeling like shit, So I just kind of like try to put some simple things in place, or have some simple fallback strategies whenever that does happen. And just, I think for me, like the thing is to just have have that acceptance that it's happening, and do have the intention to help yourself through it.
It's a great idea, because say Eckhart Tolle now, for example, he talk a lot about it, that what we manifest is only correlated to our level of consciousness at that time. And if we're there when we're in the lull and we're at a low place of consciousness, if we're trying to come up with all the tactics and come up with all the solutions there's a good chance we're probably going to fuck up every now and then and burn something or someone around us. Whereas, as you're saying, if you can figure out what you're going to do when it comes back around again, whilst you're on that higher stage of consciousness, and then when it comes through, you just actually do those things, that gives you a much better chance of coming out of it,
Yeah, I say, like, I'm only saying that from I'm only saying that from a personal kind of like point of view, and that's kind of how I kind of came about trying to help myself through those periods of time. Like, it's so I suppose everybody's different. People have different ways of doing it. I'm sure there's probably other ways that but for sure, like the lockdown has definitely provided me with some extra time to do some additional introspection into those things. But it's only like, it's just something I'm always conscious of, is just like, whenever I speak about these things, I'm only speaking about them in a very narrow context, which is the situation, the experience that I've had personally,
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, the way any of us will experience something personally, we've all experienced probably the same phenomenon, but just we'll put different words in it, or so to speak. We've all had grief, but we might call it a different thing personally, or we've all had, these different kind of truths, these ups and these downs. Somewhere deep down, there's a common ground between us all, where metaphorical language and hierarchical language can come out. But certainly, I think even the mere fact that you have your own personal strategies, that in and of itself is something that everyone could do. The fact of having a personal strategy can be good enough. And the fact that you decide to come up with the strategies when you're in the good time, that to me seems to make sense. From what I know, it seems to be a better decision than coming up with the strategies when you're in your low point. And again, I think that's kind of a common thing that we can extrapolate from that and give out, is that be okay when something goes wrong and when you're in your lull. Be forgiving. Try not to act too hastily, and try not to, go mad trying to change the world then, because you're healing and you're doing you're consciousness is going through a lot of things. And then when you're good, learn to appreciate that, learn to make the most of that while you are good, learn to strategize and do all your creative stuff then. So it's kind of, and I know what you're saying, like you're only coming at it from what you do, and I suppose that's all we can ever do as individuals, but I think there are some things that can be extrapolated and then shared as a piece of wisdom, as opposed to just a bit of information as such. And I suppose bringing it back in, we might move on just towards the podcast now, and kind of how that ties in with both Palestine Aclai and Cork Aclai. And because the podcast, you do a lot of kind of music stuff, you do a lot of non-health related stuff as well. So would you say that the podcast is more for the community aspect of it than the health side alone?
The podcast has been on the go for about 3 years now. And, I suppose it's connected to Aclai and Cork and Palestine in a way, and in a way it's not connected at all. I kind of like use the podcast to have chats with people that I'm really interested to learn more about, or people who have got a story to tell, and also to provide a platform for people to tell their stories that might not necessarily have the opportunity to do so elsewhere.
Yeah.
So in a way, like it's something that I really enjoy doing, because especially in the last couple of months, because when I've been doing the podcast, a lot of the time the only person I'm speaking to is the person I end up speaking to on the podcast that day or whatever. And there's a really nice group of
That's why this is my favorite part of today already.
Like a lot of people who support the podcast that get in touch about the shows, and have said that they're enjoying them, and have said that like they were really interested to hear people's stories. There are definitely people who wouldn't necessarily have been able to share their stories a lot of the time as well. So I mean, that's where the podcast came from, really. It's just I suppose in a way it's a forum to develop deeper understanding about things, or have discussions about particular subjects that I'm interested in, or that the guest is interested in discussing and talking about, really.
There really is such a beauty to it, because as you say, like after recording, I can't even remember how many shows now. There's a few that I haven't published just yet, and even like one guy from Australia, people from America. You're talking to people from all over the world that you might never have even met, and then you can connect with them, you can share their ideas, and you can help them by giving them a space to share. And I think that whole thing, that we seem to have that in common, that kind of a gratification from it, is that, like, I don't know, I don't give much of a fuck about myself when it comes to the podcast and what ends up for me, but like, it's just cool to be able to chat about something interesting, chat about something cool, make yourself vulnerable and put yourself out there and see what happens. I think there's just something, I don't know, something wild about all of that. That just seems a bit exciting to me, at least.
It's like one of my favorite things about the format of a podcast, in the form that the format that we have on the Rebel Matters is, I suppose, kind of similar to this. Is conversational, and it's fairly unedited for the vast majority of it. Like, and it's just it's a great way to connect with people,
Yeah.
and bring other people into conversations and be a part of the conversation myself. And like, I get a lot out of the podcast, just even speaking to the guests and getting to know people, and friends of people who we made podcasts with 3 years ago. We're still in contact with each other. So I think it's just a really nice way to kind of connect.
It's funny, like, I mean, you're on it a lot longer than I am, and I probably started recording maybe 2 months ago or something like that. And when you're starting any project, of course, you do your due diligence and you research, how you're best to do it and so on. And there was a lot of advice saying, oh, go for structure and have these questions lined out and have it all this way. And then there was some saying other things, and it's like, but you look at Joe Rogan, who goes against all of the norms and the conformities, and he could talk to somebody about anything for 3 hours, and yet that's the most popular show in the world. And I think that's, for me, that's more the essence of podcasting, is that space for conversation. And we're like, when we're allowed to speak, and dare I say even ramble, we figure it out as we're speaking. There's that direct link between thinking and speaking that most people are afraid to do. Most people are afraid to say something in case they say something they don't know. When I think a lot of time it's what we don't know can come to the fore when we speak it. And that's the beauty, for me anyway, about podcasting. and there's questions that come up even in a show that you would never have thought of to ask before the show. Whereas if we put too much structure around it, that never comes to the fore.
Well, the thing with you're saying about the structure and stuff like that, I think that for any of the projects that I've been involved in that were kind of long-term projects, I've always had to have a starting point, something to go from at the beginning. And a lot of time that has come from researching and seeing what way it's been done at that time. I can remember even when Aclai started back in 2013, that's what you have to do. You have to see what's being done out there already and get some sort of a starting point. But then as time moves on and you get to see the things that resonate with you the most, and you get to see the things that resonate with the people that are either listening to the show or coming to the gym or whatever the most, and the things that give you the best sense of satisfaction, and that you can be more creative then. And I think that structure comes organically with that, with time and with practice and with experience, and with just kind of looking at the process and seeing how you can refine it. And there's been times whenever back at the start of Aclai 2013, we've been operating for about a year, and then I realized that with some aspects of the business that we were doing them in the way that sort of should be done by the textbook as such, but that wasn't the way that's not the way that I wanted to do it. But it took a bit of time to realize that, and a bit of testing of the system, and you test and you tweak it and you test it again, and then eventually you come to a place where you're happy to operate. And then you might operate on that level for a while, and then a year down the line, or 6 months or 2 years or whatever, tweak it again and then change it. And that's kind of the process for me. That's the way that most of my projects have evolved over the years, that kind of ongoing process of tweaking and adjusting and testing it out.
Yeah, it's 100%. Even like in regular business, like we have these ideas of what way something is going to be, but in any business, if you're not adaptable as something is unfolding and you're just sticking to the way you thought it was going to be, then it's going to fail. And it's this aspect of yin and yang and all that, is that in one element we're growing like a flower in life, but in another element we're being thrown into life, and it's that duality of it. It's like you might come up with an idea that you think might work, and you do all the theory in it and you do all the learning and you try it out, and sure, it might be completely against your vibration or against your ethos or against your own artistic flavor or whatever. And I think the trick then is, once you've made that, and I wouldn't even call it a mistake, but once you've made that maybe slight error judgment, is being humble enough to maybe drop it or to adapt it the way it needs to be adapted or whatever. Whereas maybe too many people think, oh geez, no, I set this up, it'd be awful embarrassing if I didn't keep going, and so on. I was told that very early on in business, was to beware of that multiple personality disorder that people do. They set themselves up and they kind of box themselves in their ideas, and that doesn't allow for organic growth. It doesn't allow for structure to show itself to you. And that's even, as I said, I haven't done many shows, but even already I felt a difference in how I thought it was going to be compared to the start. I remember the first one I recorded, I was taken aback about, Jesus, how are you supposed to have a conversation, listen to someone, pick up on their points, and produce it at the same time, and to have notes and all these things. And it was an element of getting used to it the way I thought it was going to be, but also then getting used to it the way I didn't think it was going to be, and beginning to adapt into that, And whether that's a podcast, whether it's a business, whether it's a hobby, I think, that's that proximal zone of development where you're making mistakes, and that's okay. Too many people, want to go learn the guitar by reading about the guitar or by learning the theory, whereas you have to pick it up and play the bloody thing, and you have to make shitty noises before you can make good noises. And I think that's part of pretty much any skill or venture, really. And probably what makes two of us more similar to each other is that we're, we like to have many hands and many pies. I don't think there needs to be a limit to projects. I have much more ambitions than just a podcast and just a physio studio. That there's loads of ways in which we could explore these creative sides, and podcasting in and of itself, just to round it off, I suppose it's certainly a beautiful way to do it. It's changed the way we can learn, because before we had to sit down and give a book its full attention, or watch a video and give that its full attention, or be in front of a teacher and give that its full attention. But with podcasting, we could be driving, or we could be cutting the grass, or we could be out for a walk. We could be doing other things whilst also incorporating the learning, or the, whether it's a football podcast or a comedy podcast or whatever the hell it is. What, for me anyway, that kind of separates a podcast from most other things is that multitask ability with it. You can, as I said, you can do it while you're cooking the dinner. You can do it while you're trying to go to sleep. You can do it while you're whatever. So that's, I don't know, that's where I see the real value in it. Then, as you say, it's easy to get people on when it's, you don't have to get them to fly to where you are or to drive to where you are and meet you at a specific time, and you don't have to get them to show their face and all of these things, So it's a very interesting platform, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
So look, we're probably running out of time. We've been on now quite a bit, even though we kind of cut out earlier on for a little bit. So there might be a wee bit of an editing issue there for the listeners. So I suppose if you want to finish off to let us know kind of where Aclai Palestine is at the moment. I know they're in lockdown from a coronavirus stance as well as the Israeli stance. But are they, as soon as coronavirus is over, kind of what stage are they about to go through then? Maybe a little bit then on where the podcast is at the moment and kind of what's coming up next with that. And then I don't know if there's any secret projects or anything like that you want to plug or you want to kind of share with the audience.
Well, the ACLAÍ Palestine project, as you say, like they're on lockdown under quite, like they're staying inside for the vast majority, but we're still working on training the coaches. We've got 5 coaches out there and we're working with them on a weekly basis to train them up on just different aspects of programming and how the place is going to run whenever they have the opportunity to open the doors properly to the members of the camp out there. And if people want to follow that, the Instagram handle is Aclai_Palestine. It's ACLAI_Palestine. And then the Cork one is Aclai_Cork. And
is there still fundraising going on for?
Yeah, there is. There's a GoFundMe page, which is gofundme.com/WestBankGym. And there's a good few updates and stuff there from the trip that we made in February. It's the future of that project, really, like it's a long-term project, and there's going to be a couple of us going back out there for a more extended period once international travel and stuff resumes again. So I'll probably be out there for 4 or 8 weeks or something like that there, just depending on the timing, and we're going to do a bit more fundraising whenever that time comes as well. But the GoFundMe page is open all the time. And then the podcast is at 7:00 every Friday morning, and it's on Instagram at Rebel Matters, and I just put in Rebel Matters podcast, and it's some really good guests lined up. But just tune in, like it's on all the usual platforms. Just all the new episodes are on Friday, and then that's it, really, I suppose.
And if people want to support that, you're on Patreon with that as well, aren't you?
Patreon. The link for the Patreon is on the Instagram page in the bio, and the kind of target for the podcast is just to get 100. Like my goal for the podcast has been to make it a financially independent project as a standalone project, and we're kind of getting there. So the goal is to get 100 patrons. We've got 32 at the minute. So it's really nice. Actually, we've got a really good mention on Hot Press the other day as one of the most listened to podcasts for the rest of the lockdown. So that was a good beat boost. And
yeah, well done.
Yeah, and it's a fairly broad range of guests. Like it's all from like political activists, musicians, artists. Some of the ones are just me talking. There's a few times I've kind of read. There's a little story time at the end of every podcast episode. And at the minute, I'm reading a book at the end of the episode. It's called The Last of the Name, which is actually another fella who lived in Donegal in the late 1800s called Charles McGlinchey. It's a really nice insight into life in a time gone by and all the different kind of habits and customs that they had in day-to-day life back then.
Awesome.
So that's it.
Sweet as. Well, I shall let you go for today, and I'm sure we'll catch you up again another time. Might even get you back on. So come here. Thanks a feckin' million for joining me.
Cheers, Jack.
It's been really insightful, really inspiring as well. Keep up all the good work you're doing. I'm sure the world is a better place for it. And enjoy the rest of lockdown.
Cheers, Jack. Go on, good.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's a wrap for today, folks. I hope, like me, you enjoyed this conversation with Ainle. And if you'd like to find out more about him or follow his work, head on over to www.aclai.ie. That's ACLAI.ie. If you'd like to support us, we're on Instagram and Facebook at LifeFit Studios, or you can reach out to me on my personal account at Cairealláin_IE. If you'd like to help us keep the lights on and keep the show alive, we are also on Patreon, where every donation helps. You can find us there at the LifeFit Podcast. So stay safe out there, be kind to your fellow human, and go with love. Yours in health, Jack.